Hello everyone, this is Space Café Podcast, and I am Markus. The other day I took my children to see Macbeth, the version with Michael Fassbender, a brilliant version on a very popular streaming service. But I know it's rated 16 plus and my kids are slightly younger. But in these days of TikTok and ever shorter headlines, I thought it couldn't hurt to have a bit of a change of pace. Macbeth is tough. It's a cruel story that delves into the deepest depths of human suffering. I love the language of Shakespeare. It's been 400 years since he died, and I still feel like a barbarian in my own language. This is exactly what I am missing in current space discourse. The fine words that inspire us to think, to explore, and dream further to where no one has gone before. I'm not talking about big words, big announcements, but rather those small ones from artists, poets, and writers who first make us dream and then inspire scientists and engineers in turn to put flesh on those virgin bones to turn fiction into reality. My bubble is full of engineers, scientists, space lawyers, space debris removers. It's full of diplomats and managers and doers, and that is a good thing, of course. Don't misunderstand me. What I miss, though, are those who are sometimes ahead of all in breaking new ground, not with rockets, but with words, in moments where there are no words yet. Midge Goldberg is a poet who has published a fascinating booklet called Outer Space, 100 Poems.
Oh yeah, well thank you for inviting me.
With her, I want to re-explore the boundaries that the Space Café podcast likes to push. Let's find out how far we can go.
I hope so. I realize as I talk that I obviously fall more on the poet side than the science side.
But before we kick this off, I may have an offer for you. We'll give a shout out to any business that rates or reviews the Space Café podcast. That's right, a simple rating or review could get you free advertising on the popular Space Café podcast show. So what are you waiting for? Leave us a review and let the world know what you think of our cozy coffee observatory. So head over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify, Podchaser, Castbox, wherever you listen to the show, and send us a message and get ready to have your brand heard on Space Café Podcast. All right then. Now, 3, 2, 1, let's go. How does it feel to you, or what do your eyes as an artist see what is going on at the moment? Because to me, I feel like there's a lot of symbolism and metaphor behind what is going on at the moment, because this is not just that we're sending rockets into space. We have developed the tools to do something that is maybe a new leap of mankind into something. And I'm curious to find out what that is. Is it just discovering a new continent, as we've been doing it for a while on Earth? And now we ran out of continents. Now we need something new.
Well, I think some of what I said about, at first it just felt like this adventure, and now you hear these different emotions as people are getting more into it. And that makes it more complex about how to think about it. It's not just let's go out there, but then, what do we do when we get out there, and what are our responsibilities, and what are people's emotional reactions? I think I read something about William Shatner, and I didn't research it to check it was true, but his reaction to it, and not just like, isn't it great, but sort of opposite emotion. I also think one of my own poems, which isn't in the book, is sort of about how identifying with some of these machines and these things that are going out there as everything is more automated, and all of our emotions that we bring along with that, and how does that work? And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't work. It was about feeling sad when they stopped singing Happy Birthday to Curiosity, and how sad people felt about that. And then what are we sad about? Why are we sad about a machine? But then we're still human and we still bring all that with us. So those things are interesting to see how what we carry with us translates into straight exploration.
Absolutely. And I think it's also a moment, and that's super interesting that you're mentioning that relationship with machines, because just the other day, I'm playing currently I think like everyone does, a little bit of a ChatGPT and just to trying to find out what the AI can do for us at the moment, this AI system. And I'm learning, the more I'm engaging with that system, I'm learning that I need to find a language to speak with that machine. And this is a new language, a new kind of language I have not used so far. And now you at the same time are telling me that this relationship between us and machines is producing different kinds of emotions. So this is a very strange moment in time where maybe it seems like a little bit science fiction is becoming a reality at the moment.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think I'm, at the age I am and what my interests, I'm stuck exactly on this, pivot point. I mean, when my day job is all about digital and working in computers and everything. And yet part of me, when I stop doing that, I don't want any of it. I don't want too much sci-fi, I guess. I don't want any voice recognition things in my house because I've watched too many episodes, too many movies where that's a terrible thing. So I, on the one hand, I have to communicate with computers. On the other hand, sometimes I absolutely want people to remember how to communicate better this way and not just communicate through computers.
You published not very long ago a book called Outer Space, 100 Poems. Why poetry in space?
So it started because I had a poem published in another one of this anthology series, 100 Poems about Romanticism. I'm coming from the poetry side. And when I saw the book, I thought, wow, this would be perfect for a topic, to have a topic instead of having a school of poetry. And at the time, it was 2019, and everyone was talking about the anniversary of the moon landing. And I loved all this, stuff about space and the poems about space. And the two of them just went together. And I thought, these are two of my interests, and this seems like a perfect time to propose something like this, where there would be people in both areas, and if who are interested in poetry and who are interested in outer space, who might be interested in this book.
What does poetry have to do with space? I mean, this is not your usual combination.
I think that they have a lot to do with each other, because I think that poets and astronomers in some ways ask a lot of the same questions about, where are we going? Where did we come from? And they're obviously looking in two different places, but I think that metaphor has a lot to do with answers in both of them. When you look out in space and you don't know what you're looking at, you have to first come up with a way of talking about it. And everything that you think it is a metaphor for what it is until you actually find out what it is as a scientist. And of course, for poets, that's the language of poetry is metaphor. So I think that in some ways we're answering a lot of the same questions.
Do you have a favorite poem from your collection?
I mean, my favorite poem depends on what day it is, what time of day. I mean, I have a lot of favorites, but I think this one captures that intersection between poets and astronomers, because it's a poem by Tracy K. Smith. It's an excerpt from a poem called My God, It's Full of Stars. And it's about her father who worked on the Hubble telescope. So it's from the point of view of a scientist, but when you get to the end, it's where both scientists and poets both feel that same question. So from My God, It's Full of Stars by Tracy K. Smith. When my father worked on the Hubble telescope, he said, they operated like surgeons, scrubbed and sheathed in papery green, the room a clean cold, a bright white. He'd read Larry Niven at home and drink scotch on the rocks, his eyes exhausted and pink, Those were the Reagan years, when we lived with our finger on the button and struggled to view our enemies as children. My father spent whole seasons bowing before the oracle eye, hungry for what it would find. His face lit up when anyone asked, and his arms would rise as if he were weightless, perfectly at ease in the never-ending night of space. On the ground, we tied postcards to balloons for peace. Prince Charles married Lady Di. Rock Hudson died. We learned new words for things. The decade changed. The first few pictures came back blurred, and I felt ashamed for all the cheerful engineers, my father and his tribe. The second time, the optics jibed. We saw to the edge of all there is, so brutal and alive, it seemed to comprehend us back.
Beautiful. I think we all remember that moment, that super embarrassing very first moment when the blurry images arrived. And then it's like they had to put or develop glasses to correct for the aberration.
Oh, wow.
So it was, I think it's also a very nice symbolism that the first take was just not perfect, and it expected another moment of attention. The telescope wanted more attention. Come to me. I need my glasses. I left them back on Earth. Bring them, and then I can show you the universe.
That's a great poem in and of itself there. It's interesting because there are a number of poems in the book earlier, before the Hubble, obviously, where people are looking up at the sky and they feel this kind of, the unknown or dread or whatever, and they react in different ways. But this is the first poem in the book where space is looking back at us and where we really can see. So it really is, it's really a pivotal moment in the book. And it's one of the poems that always gives me chills every time I read it.
Because of that looking back moment. That I think what gives us all chills is the sheer thought that something is out there, something unknown, something profound is out there. And we do not know, is it alive? Is it conscious? Is it... I don't know what it is. I think this lack of knowledge is that what gives me personally chills, because we do not know what we're dealing with.
Exactly. There's a different poem in the book where it talks about how that process itself changes people. It's an older poem, but slightly older, by Howard Nemeroff, and he's watching the launch of a space shuttle of Atlantis, and he's saying how they're going to take pictures, and when the pictures come back, the pictures are going to rewrite how we understand ourselves and life. Our whole way of thinking is going to change just because we now have these pictures.
Do you mind sharing it?
No, I'd love to. It's got a little interesting reference in it. It refers to Dante, and Dante has a line where he talks about the unpeopled world. And what's amazing is that Dante line, the unpeopled world, I've found in poems across the centuries. It's probably in this book 2 or 3 different times. And how it captured that sense of adventure that Dante was talking about, sailors going out sort of beyond what had already been mapped. But people immediately latched onto it for space as well. And so Howard Nemeroff refers to it in this poem. So it's called Witnessing the Launch of the Space Shuttle Atlantis. So much of life in the world is waiting that this day was no exception. So we waited all morning long and into the afternoon. I spent some of the time remembering Dante, who did the voyage in the mind, alone, with no more nor heavier machinery than the ghost of a girl giving him guidance, and wondered if much was lost to gain all this new world of engine and energy, where dream translates into deed. But when the thing went up, it was indeed impressive, as if hell itself opened to send its emissary in search of heaven or the unpeopled world, thus Dante of doomed Ulysses, behind the sun. So much of life in the world is memory, that the moment of the happening itself, so much with noise and smoke and rising clear to vanish at the limit of our vision into the light blue light of afternoon, appeared no more against the void in aim than the flare of a match in sunlight, quickly snuffed. What yet may come of this, we cannot know. Great things are promised, as the promised land promised to Moses, that he would not see but a distant sight of, though the children would. The world is made of pictures of the world, and the pictures change the world into another world we cannot know, as we knew not this one.
Do you watch rocket launches live?
I watched some of them on the videos. When I was a kid, I lived in Florida, and when they first set off the first space shuttle, they called us all. I was on the west coast of Florida, but they called us all out of class to stand there, and we just looked across the sky and saw this streak of light just going up in the air, and that was the first space shuttle. That was pretty exciting.
Wow. How did that feel? Or do you get used to it and it's just another space shuttle? Or is this something very special? How does that feel?
No, that one and the ones that came after it while I was still there, they were just amazing. We would watch them take off, and then we would watch all the reporting every day. It was just incredible to think that there were people like up there flying over our heads, you know. I mean, I was very small when the moon landing happened, and so I remember it going on, but I, wasn't thinking that much in depth about it. But this one was just amazing, especially with all of this other stuff, all of the other culture, Star Wars and all of that, that somebody's up there in a spaceship. It was so exciting.
When you're reading those excerpts, I get some memories back from how I perceived those moments. And so I think poetry is something very individual, very, very personal. I was wondering, do you feel like that poetry could proactively contribute something to the space industry? Not just as a byproduct, but also something productive for the space industry. Do you think that poets should be part of whoever is designing the next space mission?
Well, I know at least two scientists who are poets and part of the group of thinking about what comes next. I think that anything where people like to imagine is always a good contribution. I mean, obviously not in every meeting, but when you're especially when you're trying to imagine life out there and bringing people out and how life would be and all of that, I think that having as many people that can imagine all different aspects of that is a good idea. So there are two poems in here. One is by Yuan Wang, and she's researches the Andromeda Galaxy, and she writes about researching the Andromeda Galaxy and then kind of refers it back home. So if you like, I can read that one.
Sure. So she's a scientist and at the same time a poet.
Dr. Yuan Wang, she's a cosmologist at the California Institute of Technology. She's a poet and she's also a translator. So I have one of her poems in here, as well as one of her translations of the poet Du Fu, who was an 8th century Chinese poet. So this is Space Journal, Serendipity, by Dr. Yuan Wang. En route to Andromeda, I launched luminous spheres into the black desert of space to measure the expansion of the universe. Back to the garden, the air sparkles. Hildegard Behrens singing Brunhilde's Dilemma. Resist the urge to touch rainbow fish in the lily pond. Climb the aspen tree, its eyes latch onto my toes. Light takes 2 million years to reach Andromeda. The universe is almost empty. A cat's reflection gazes back at me from the dome's translucent dark vault.
Would you want to board a spaceship if you were invited to go to the stars and see for yourself?
That's such a good question. I would love to do it if I could come back home in a reasonable amount of time, which I gather is not possible. I think I would love to see it, but like in Ewan's poem, there's stuff on Earth that I love so much that I couldn't leave it. I couldn't leave my kids and what's going to happen to them, and my cats and my chickens and my garden and all of those things that tie me to home too. But boy, if I could go up there and zoom around for a while and come back down, absolutely.
What is space to you? How does it feel like if you just picture that word and whatever comes along with it?
I think for me, probably stuck in a layperson's view of it. I think for me, it's adventure. It's seeing something new. It's seeing how far you could go if there was something out there to discover. A lot of those like adventurous kinds of things. I think when if I start thinking about the scarier things, or going out forever, or having to go because I couldn't stay on Earth anymore, those kinds of things, I don't imagine so much. I like the adventurous side of it.
There's a bunch of crazy and slightly problematic things about space, at least to me, and that is that it perhaps is boundless. That makes me uncomfortable. Because
I think I agree with you. That's the zoom around but come back. That way I don't have to deal with the boundless.
The other day, someone came up with that very brilliant idea. I think it was a kid. The last number before infinity. That's an extremely compelling thing to say. What is the last number before infinity? And this is also as disturbing as the concept of infinite space to me. But anyway, I think it's something very personal, very, very subjective. I was going to ask, how does one approach a publisher with such an idea to publish a book with 100 poems about space? And your publisher is not a no-name publisher. So how did that work?
Well, I was very lucky. As I mentioned, I had a translation included in an earlier volume of theirs that was a different editor, so I was only approached by the editor. But then when I came up with the idea, I asked the editor, well, what do you think? The editor was Michael Ferber, a professor of English at the University of New Hampshire, and I asked him, what do you think? And he said, great idea. Here's the editor at Cambridge. Why don't you just email her and see what she says? And so I did. Her name's Bethany Thomas, and I emailed her, and she wrote back the most wonderful response. She had just always been thinking about the series in terms of individual poets or schools of poetry, and the idea of doing on outer space to her was so exciting. Again, for the same reasons that it was such an interesting topic and taking the series in a new direction. So she was very supportive. It took a few times to get the table of contents right. There are all kinds of, realities that bring you back to earth about publishing, just like probably about building a rocket. But once we figured that out, I think that the book ended up somewhere that I would never have imagined, and so much better than I would have imagined.
You know what's also very uplifting about your story, is that just a couple of episodes ago, I had Kevin O'Connell on the show. He was the former director for space commerce in the United States. And he said that the space industry is in need of any kind of expert and talent and job description. So name any job description, space wants it. And now here we go. Here we have poetry in space. So you're the living proof that something seriously interesting is going on. Because, again, poets and space is not your obvious combination. And still, your story is the living proof that it works.
The idea of poets and space was the book ends with a poem by Charles Simic, who just passed away very recently. And it was actually included on a space probe, on Lucy, the space probe to Jupiter. And so there's a poem literally being sent out to space.
Wow. Is it in the book?
It is. It's the last poem in the book.
Can we hear it?
Absolutely.
It's in space right now also.
Yep.
That's kind of exciting. Wow.
Yep. It's on the space probe Lucy, included by NASA in a July 2021 mission to Jupiter.
This is also something mind-blowing. Again, right now, out there, there's a spacecraft. Inside that spacecraft, I don't know, is it a piece of paper or is it a USB drive or whatever?
I don't know. He didn't tell me that. He was very, very nice and generous and let me use it for the book. And he tells me, he waits to hear from Lucy on how she's doing, or he did tell me that. But I don't know the exact medium that the poem is in. I just learned that Ada Limon, who's the Poet Laureate of the United States, is going to have her poem inscribed on a probe going out to space. So that's the next step in this, and that's also very exciting.
This is obviously the age of space poetry, literally. Yeah. All right, please go ahead.
Okay. Included by NASA in a 2021 mission to Jupiter by Charles Simic. I'm writing to you from a world you'll have a hard time imagining, to a world I can't picture no matter how hard I try. Do you still have birds that wake you up in the morning with their singing, and lovers who gaze at the stars, trying to read in them the fate of their love? If you do, we'll recognize each other.
Do you think that at some point in time, someone out there will be able to decode that message?
I think so. I think if you are advanced enough civilization to be getting that, you'd probably have cryptographers who could come up with pretty much what that meant, especially given that I think we've been sending other messages out in other media along the way. Maybe they'd collect enough English. I also love the movie Contact, and so if they can do it in Contact, then also the novel by Carter. Sorry.
The ending is kind of strange. The movie
In Contact?
In Contact, yeah. I don't know, to me at least. Maybe this is just a matter of taste, because the overall story is brilliant and really compelling, but then all of a sudden that interaction between the alien civilization and what was her name again? I can't remember. The main protagonist. That was kind of surprising to me, but it's a brilliant movie. Of course, written by a brilliant person. Also a space poet, I should say, Carl Sagan. Do you think we're alone in the universe?
It's her line from the movie. If we are, it's an awful waste of space. I feel like how could we be? How could we be?
To go back to the poetry in space bit on that space probe, do you think that poetry is something that can only be understood by human beings? Is this just an assembly of letters, words, and lines and sentences, or is poetry something else? Is poetry different to 3 times 7 is 21?
So I have so many different answers to this question. I think that with the right mindset, you could find a poem in almost anything, because it's about metaphor. So what does that inspire in you? I might have to think a little about what 7 times 3, what the metaphor of that is, but I think I could find one. I think I could talk about, I think I could talk about all the different chances and different combinations and different how things interact, that would just turn it into a metaphor. There's an example in the book. This is by a different scientist. This is by Dr. Alice Gorman. She's a space archaeologist. And when you talk about finding poetry in something like 7x3, well, she took the transcript from Valentina Tereshkova, her first flight into space, and she turned it into a poem. And it's amazing what, by just using her words, Valentina's words, that you get emotion, you imagine, you bring your own feelings to it, as well as trying to understand her feelings. So I think you can find poetry in anything. And yes, I think that poetry is using the medium of words to generate these emotions. Of course, there are other arts that use other things, visual or oral, to generate emotions. But I think that any civilization that communicates in words is going to have poetry.
We had Dr. Alice Gorman on the show a while ago. So do you mind sharing her poem with us?
Not at all. I'd love to. She was so excited when I asked her for this poem, and I was so impressed with her, Alice, you have an asteroid named after you. How is this exciting? And she's like, it's exciting. So it was great. It's great to talk to her. So it's a longer poem, so I'm only going to read a few of the sections.
Yes.
But it is taken from a transcript of Valentina Tereshkova's spaceflight. So the poem is called Here Now the Sun, a poem for Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman in space, by Dr. Alice Gorman. 1. Ready for launch. The suit is working well. The inflow stream is working well. I'm ready for launch. I feel excellent. Everything is normal. I'm not a delicate lady. Everything is normal on board. I'm ready for launch. I'm taking up the initial position, feeling excellent. 2. Launch. The vehicle's moving smoothly. Vehicle's moving smoothly. I feel excellent. Vehicle's moving well. I feel good. I feel good. I see the Earth on the porthole. I feel excellent. The Earth is very beautiful. The vehicle is moving smoothly. I see the Earth in the porthole, slightly obscured by clouds. So I'm going to jump ahead to a couple of other sections. 6. Fourth orbit. 19 hours, 25 minutes. I sang songs for him. In the center, such a blue spot. Here now the sun. So orange, not red, not light red, but orange. I'm also feeling excellent. Here now the sun, visible and lit up. In the outer ring, the horizon is visible. It's a very beautiful sight. At first it's light blue, then lighter, then dark. 7. Greetings to all the women of the world. Soviet women, greetings to all Soviet women. I wish you personal good luck and great success. Women of the world, greetings to you from space. I wish you good luck and success. And then section 10, shadows. There aren't enough fingers to block the sun. It's very sunny, difficult to see. At the present, a very bright sun, illuminating the very high clouds. The horizon above the bright clouds transitions into shadows. The dark sky is visible in the viewport. The flight is proceeding normally. I feel excellent. 11. This is Chaika. This is Chaika. Over. 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 This is Chaika. Over.
Wow. What a cliffhanger.
Yeah. I don't know if there's an actual recording of her talking, but I try when I'm reading it to stay as neutral as I can, so not to bring what I might imagine to what she's saying. But I think each person, when they read that poem, they're going to hear a voice in their head and, think about what she's feeling and why she's saying what she's saying. And then that end part, you can take it in so many different directions in your mind.
You can hear the void from out there.
Absolutely.
Between the lines.
Yeah, in my mind, it's so this echoing, lonely, desperate.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, that's just reading it on the page, but.
Yeah. But this is what poetry is all about. It's up for different readings.
Exactly. And even something as concrete as this transcript.
Yeah.
You know, that's what I think is the beauty of this poem is Alice seeing the poetry in those, concrete phrases.
There's something we're lacking in globally, I would say, and that is science communication. To make science understood, and I'm not talking about indoctrination, but I'm talking about translating the beauty of science, if we understand it as a reflection on reality in the most objective way we can make it objective, of course. So, and globally, what we're seeing is a lack of understanding for the importance of something like this. And this in turn produces the issues. Education is having its issues and whatnot. Schools. Do you think that your profession could help? That we're missing something, that science, and in our case now, the space industry, rocket science literally, is too much located and focused on our rational minds, on the rational part of our minds, and that we're missing something essential?
So one of my ideas for this book was that it would be like a wonderful crossover for teachers who are trying to, get English humanities students interested in science, and to get science students interested in humanities by both of those things, introducing scientific topics and showing the humanity that's within the science. So I don't know if it's okay. I told you one of the poems in here is by my husband, but it's a poem about Olber's paradox, and I think it's an answer to what you were talking about, which is that it's talking about a scientific concept, but then it's adding this humanity to it so that people who don't necessarily might not have ever thought about it are now thinking about it.
Let's hear it. I love it. This wasn't intended to be a reading session at all, but it turns out to be very, very fruitful and enlightening.
So this poem is called Olber's Paradox. So Olber's Paradox asks why, when the sky is full of stars, is it still dark at night? And I read that the first scientifically reasonable answer to this was proposed by Edgar Allan Poe, who was a poet. The poem is called Olber's Paradox, and it's by Robert W. Crawford, an American poet. The heavens hold more stars than earth has grains of sand, and, given time, each tiny sun combined should make a world where starlight stains the sky bright white, where dark would be undone. And yet the night remains. The dim stars gleam their separate ways, and constellations drawn connect their dots, while under them we dream and sleep, then wake to such a thing as dawn. The universe, expanding since its birth, is larger, older than its light, sublime, the force that keeps this constant day from earth, the same that measures out our years, is time, the limitation that provides us night and saves us all from unremitting light.
Let's just go back to the first couple of sentences you read when you said there's more stars than grains of sand on earth. This is so mind-blowing. When I first came across that concept, I couldn't believe it. Then I looked it up, and it seems like it's just fact. And I mean, like, isn't this is literally unbelievable. This is literally unbelievable. Because if you go to a random beach and dig your right hand into the sand, and then you try to count the grains of sand, it'll take a while, I guess, maybe the afternoon. But then you take your left hand also. Then you have the next morning until noon to count. And then just imagine to repeat that over and over and over again for all the beaches on the planet. And then you add the pebbles to it and the little rocks and add everything together. And still you do not have the number of stars there are in the universe. This is mind-blowing. Literally.
I think that's where poetry helps out, in that it gives us some kind of metaphor, some kind of way to try to think about that. And
come to terms with it.
And that's, scientists are doing it too. I mean, they're using metaphor for these things that are so mind-blowing in order to understand it and to help everyone else understand it.
I like one of the metaphors you mentioned when we talked before that recording. You sent me a little bit of information about your work, and I came across that beautiful metaphor with the black hole. Mm-hmm. And this is a metaphor that, for some strange reason, implies something that is not true, because the opposite is true. And that is really interesting, because a black hole is not a hole. It's quite the opposite. It's something extremely concrete. And and I looked it up. It goes back to the physicist John Wheeler. And in 1967, during a lecture, allegedly, one of his students made that comment that this could be labeled black hole. And John Wheeler liked it and stole it from his student and made it famous, because he saw them, as he said, the marketing potential behind that term. So, but again, if we think it through, a black hole is not a black hole because it's extreme dense matter. So here the metaphor does not really work.
Well, it's funny. I mean, it happens in everyday language too, where someone will come up with a metaphor for something, and then we are so used to saying it that we don't even think about it as being a metaphor anymore. We just use the phrase, and then sometimes it takes a poet to come back along and like unwrap the metaphor and turn it back into real words. Not space related, but I wrote a poem about the phrase "hold your horses" once. And, hold your horses, slow down is hold your horses expression for slow down. But I wrote a poem about holding your horses and don't let them sleep outside and bring them inside to the table and really, honor them. And so it's funny how there's this we use metaphor to help us understand things that we don't understand. Then we understand them. Then we go back to the metaphor and see what we can do with that metaphor, whether we blow it up or we keep it or turn it into something new.
You collected 100 poems in that publication. Do you, and they're from different stages in human history. Do you see any kind of, how shall I say that, evolution in those poems when it comes to maybe understanding of the concepts that the poems are dealing with? Or to cut this short, are we as human beings learning, or are we still baffled by the same old problems? Because I could imagine that when Lucretius looked up at the sky, or I don't know, ancient cultures, cave people looked at the sky, maybe they saw the same stars, and maybe they had the same moments of awe. And I'm just wondering, is it different for us today, or are we still in that same mindset?
Again, so many different answers. I think that we're doing both. I think that obviously we're learning. you mentioned Lucretius, who had opinions about atoms and matter forming in outer space. And then you watch, there's a poem by Tycho Brahe in here, and there's a poem by, the modern scientists you've heard, obviously they know more about science. So we can see that evolution. There are poems that are focused on outer space and religion. And you can even see the argument happening between some of the poems that are written around the same time. One by Edmund Halley honoring Isaac Newton, and one by another poet who's sort of saying, well, sure, Newton's okay, but still God does everything and God can just blow up the rules if he wants. So, there's some of that going on throughout the book, but there are also poems, about love, and love in the 12th century BCE in Egypt is not that different than love in the 20th century. So there are both things.
I'd love to hear the oldest poem in your collection. How long does your collection date back?
The oldest poem is dated to around the 12th century BCE. The poet is unknown.
BCE,
but
wow.
BCE, yep.
Wow.
It's the poet is unknown, but it's the collected songs from the ballad Mistress, Reticent Lovers. It's part of the Chester Beatty Papyrus collection. So, shall I read it?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So this is collected songs from the ballad Mistress, Reticent Lovers, and it's translated by Dr. Alan Hum. Boy, there is no one like my sister, the loveliest of all women. She is Sirius rising, heralding the rising Nile, shining, light-skinned, exquisite, her eyes constantly wandering. Her lips speak sweetly, but do not ramble. Her neck is long, her breasts white, her hair lapis lazuli. Her arms outshine gold with lotus fingers, full rear, narrow waist, and thighs that lead to splendor. Her stride is a magic charm. My heart is bewitched in her embrace. She'll turn the head of any man who catches a glimpse of her. Any man who gets her into bed is indeed a master lover. When she emerges, it is like the emergence of the one. So the reason this is in here is that, the reference of Sirius, beauty and love are being related to stars and planets throughout the book. Obviously Venus and the moon. And also Sirius is part of the Egyptian astronomical calendar. And it gave them an idea of when to plant. And that's also a theme you find, especially in the older poems, a poem by Virgil, of people using the sky as ways of marking time and when to plant crops and when to harvest crops.
That's so fascinating. I mean, that's 3,000 years old.
Yeah, and they knew the name Sirius. Not sure if you want to use that poem or not. As I'm reading it, I'm like, but you can. It's fine.
Beautiful. I will totally use it.
Okay.
Do you think that this is the end of poetry, because artificial intelligence is stealing our jobs? And if I wanted to, I could feed Lucretius or Tycho Brahe or Alice Gorman's oeuvre into those machines and tell them to come up with something in their style. So people are arguing that we're losing our jobs.
I don't think so, at least not in my lifetime. So maybe someday down the road and I'll be gone and I'll be happy not to see that. But I don't think so. I've seen some friends of mine who have tried it, and I tend to write formal poetry, meaning in meter and rhyme. And especially those, they say they have tried experiments to see if it can do it, and it just can't understand it at all. It can't get the meter and the rhyme and the meaning in any way. So, of course, I can't say it would never happen, but I just feel that there's so much humanity in a poem. There's so much emotion and connection and context and everything that makes us human, that I don't see how a machine could imitate that in enough of a way to make a good poem.
What makes us human?
I think metaphor. I think being able to see one thing and think of something totally different. And it's so crazy that you never would have thought of it, but the minute you think of it, it makes perfect sense, and it makes perfect sense to the people who also read the poem. And then you've all connected in this way that doesn't exist in the real world, and it doesn't exist on the paper. It exists
just in our
between
minds.
us all.
Yeah. It's like the apple tree. If I say apple tree, you know what I mean, but you may see a completely different apple tree in your mind.
I mean, that's the challenge of poetry. A lot of people like to write poetry, and it makes sense to them. But what makes and that's good, and that's fine, and that if that satisfies them, that's good. But something about a really good poem is that when someone can write it and someone's completely somewhere else who doesn't know the poet, doesn't know what's happened, can understand it, and not just understand it at the first level, but understand the emotion and feel the emotion, the communication. That's what makes a really good poem.
Who is your book for? Is it for the Space Café podcast audiences? Is it for the engineers, for the scientists? Who is it for?
I hope so. I hope it's for the scientists. It's reading something that maybe lets them see something that they do every day in a new way. I also want it to be for the lay people who might not know that much about science, and they might not know that much about poetry, but they're reading something that's both interesting and sparks their imagination and makes them feel.
I have an unusual question, because we have maybe two unusual questions at the end of our show. Question number one is, and this is a real thing we're putting up, it's a Spotify playlist for the future space traveler. And now picture yourself as being one of the future space travelers, and you're asked to go to your destination, and it's a very long journey. Of course, it's a vast place out there. And which one tune will you pick to introduce to that Spotify playlist? Which one would you want to have with you on that journey?
Well, to totally date myself, I think it would be Annie's Song by John Denver. It's about love. It's about everything beautiful about the earth. I think those would be the two things I would want to keep in my head as I was headed out into space.
Cool. Thank you so much. Question number two. This is the Space Café podcast, a coffee place. Now and then, if you go to coffee places, you enjoy an espresso to energize yourself. Now, I'm challenging you to share an espresso for the mind with me and the audiences. What is it that you want to share that you think could energize, could inspire our minds? You can pick whatever kind of topic you want to pick.
Of course, I go right to the poems because so many of them are inspiration for me on different days with different feelings. If I had to pick one of them, I would pick, it's pretty simplistic and maybe it goes along with my John Denver answer, but I would pick this poem called The Ballet of the 8-Week Kittens. It's pretty simplistic, but it sort of taps into that feeling of excitement and adventure and exploration that I think is the kind of thing that gets me energized. The Ballad of the 8-Week Kittens by Deborah Warren. With such abandon, buoyant wide jetés around the kitchen, furniture and air possessed by arcs of fur and ricochets, plunges and cabrioles, they're everywhere. Dance, kittens. Take the table, flying jump drunk. You have cause to pirouette, more than you dream of, barns and meadows lying outside, things you don't imagine yet. Hurl yourself in knots across the floor, leaps demented entrechat. Ignore the galaxies beyond the kitchen door. And when you tumble to it that there's more than this, more than the little world you know, take me out there with you when you go.
Midge Goldberg, thank you so much for spending time with me here on the show.
Well, thank you very much, Markus.
Thank you for being with us today. We really appreciate your loyalty. Take good care. Bye-bye for now.